Coming up on another exciting installment of That Was a Show. George and Leo was a show. Bob Newhart played George, which is his actual first name in real life, thus keeping up the tradition of naming every single show he did after himself. George is the owner of a charming little bookshop on the equally charming little island of Martha's Vineyard. His son Ted, played by Jason Batement, is engaged to be married to Casey, played first by Bess Meyer and then later by Robyn Lively. Casey's father Leo, played by Judd Hirsch, shows up unexpectedly after being estranged from her for several years. He ran away to work as a magician in Vegas, but actually as a lackey for mobsters and general ne'er-do-well. He ends up moving into the spare bedroom upstairs above the bookshop. The mild-mannered and uptight George butts heads with the smooth-talking yet shifty Leo, turning them into the perfect odd couple for 1997. Brynn, Aaron, and Barry try to figure out why this charming little show only lasted one season. We grew up during peak sitcom, Seinfeld, Friends, The Fresh Prince, but those shows were diamonds in the rough. This podcast is not about those diamonds. It's about the rough. Some sitcoms were briefly popular in their time. Some were canceled almost immediately. You probably won't recognize most of these, and you'll ask, that was a show?
That was a show?
The podcast about failed or forgotten sitcoms from the 80s and 90s, starring
Brynn Burney,
Aaron Yeager,
And Andrew Helmer as Barry.
a Radio Gizmo production. Aaron,
Yes.
you want to do me a huge favor? Would you like to grab me a banana that I can quickly scarf down?
Yes.
I thought this was a bit.
This
I thought you were
part
doing
is
a bit.
staying in. I will get you a banana.
Okay.
And while she eats that banana, Barry and I will get caught up. What's the show that we recently started watching that's really good? What was that called?
This is great stuff.
Um,
Is it Baby Reindeer? Because I watched all of that in one sitting.
Oh, was that good?
Oh man, it fucked me up.
Okay, I gotta watch that.
It was real good.
That you
Real,
and
real
I
good.
started watching, Aaron?
yeah. The one that's like set in like the middle America farm town thing.
Someone somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
It's good. Good.
Yeah, it's been around for a while,
Oh.
but
It's not a great title. That's not a great
No,
title. It's
it's,
not doing nothing for me. That was a show.
It's starring Bridget Everett. She's like a comedian, and she has this whole persona that's like it's kind of like oh goodness, she has like a big Aaron, what's the word I'm looking for?
Personality.
Like she's a singer as well, but it's very campy.
Oh, I know her.
Yeah.
I Googled her.
Yeah, she's fun. But the show is like kind of like a dramedy about this like young woman who has to go back to her hometown, and it's basically something I would have written, but they beat me to it.
Yeah.
I feel like Baby Reindeer is the type of thing I wish that I had the guts to write.
Yeah.
But
Interesting.
but
We'll have to check it out.
Yeah. I'm nearing the end of Curb Your Enthusiasm. I'm a few episodes from the finish line.
Do you know the ending?
I don't.
Oh,
And
okay.
He's
I
got-
know the ending, because that's all I cared about.
But I crossed a threshold in the season where
Mhm.
I've started to be able to predict, I think, what everything's building to, and suddenly there's an aspect of what was going on that dawned on me where I was like, oh, I see where he might be going with this, and yeah, so I'm excited for the ending, but don't spoil anything.
Not being a Curb fan, I quite liked the ending from what I saw of it.
Okay. Yeah.
It coming at it from somebody who has no opinion whatsoever on it and yet somehow insisted on having one. Yeah, good show there, Mr. David.
All right. I guess we should actually segue
Jesus.
into the show we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a Brynn pick, and it's one that I wanted to cover way back when I first basically got acquainted with Bob Newhart when we did our Bob episode. So, yeah, this week I decided that we would cover George and Leo. George and Leo, it turns out, was a show. This CBS sitcom was created by Rob Long and Dan Staley. It starred TV legends Bob Newhart as George and Judd Hirsch as Leo, the ultimate odd couple. The other main cast members include Jason Batement as George's son Ted, Robyn Lively as his fiancée and Leo's daughter Casey, and Daryl Fierce as Ambrose, George's employee. So the series is set in the idyllic community of Martha's Vineyard and begins on the eve of Ted and Casey's wedding. We watched the pilot in episode 8 in preparation for this podcast. In the pilot, I'll give you guys a brief summary because, you know, it really does a great job of setting everything up, and then we'll kind of go into our own discussion of it. But basically, the two dads meet by chance in George's bookstore. The two have a contentious interaction, and surprise, it's later revealed that their kids are about to marry each other. We also learn that Leo and Casey have been estranged for over a decade, and that Ted, in a misguided attempt to surprise her, has invited Leo to the wedding. Another wild twist is that Leo is actually on the run from the mafia. He had just come from Vegas, where he had been living and working as a bagman. And essentially he ran off with $25,000 that he was supposed to deliver. A mob hitman shows up in Martha's Vineyard to take out Leo, and George ultimately saves the day, telling the hitman that the money is there, and somehow he convinces him not to kill Leo. The mobster agrees as long as Leo stays out of Vegas. Then Leo basically invites himself to live in a room above George's bookstore, setting up the odd couple dynamic and weird friendship that continues throughout the series.
Okay.
Good
summary. Yeah.
Yeah, by the way, it had one season. So it was only one season, 22 episodes. It was like a little one-season wonder.
Spoiler alert, I enjoyed this show.
Yeah, same. How about you, Barry?
Spoiler alert. Yeah, same.
Yeah.
So this is only is this only the second Newhart show we've done? It feels like
it's only the
more.
second one, which is wild.
This is the most I've ever liked Bob Newhart.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
the
actually,
rhythms, they're really writing for his rhythms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also it feels like, because it's a two-hander between him and Hirsch,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel as beholden to Bob Newhart, right?
Well,
so
yeah.
he gets to be funny
Yeah.
and do his thing, but the scenes have to keep
Yeah,
moving
but not
along.
carry everything. Like there's actual
Yeah.
scenes.
Well, the two
with
of them
conflict.
play off really well together. And I actually, of the two of them, I thought Judd Hirsch really stood out more to me. I chuckled a lot more at him
Absolutely.
than I did at Bob Newhart, which is interesting because I basically fell in love with Bob Newhart after we watched Bob. So it's very interesting.
But that's what's interesting.
It's a good dynamic.
To, if I may spontaneously merge both of your points there.
Yeah.
One of the reasons this works is that Bob Newhart's doing his shtick, but although they are both funny, he is more the straight man out of the two of them.
Yeah.
And so his stammering reactions to things work really well in the context of someone else being the sillier character for him to react to.
Yeah.
And Judd Hirsch does that role really well.
I mean, Judd Hirsch is just one of those performers that is just always a delight, you know? No matter how much of him you get, he's great.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, as weird as it sounds, and I'm probably not alone, like one of Judd Hirsch's most memorable performances in fucking Independence Day of all things. He's this movie where he has no business being in it.
Yeah.
And you know, it's obviously not a very good movie, but like it's always one of the first things I think of when I think of Judd Hirsch. I think of how funny he is in this movie that he has no business being in. Or you think of like, you know, he got nominated for Fabelmans.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh my God, he
and
was
I
so
remember
good.
people being up in arms over his small role getting a supporting nom. And I remember just being like, yeah, because it was one of the best performances of the year. Like,
because it was
like,
great.
That's
like
why
everyone,
I got it. Yeah. Like, fuck off.
Yeah,
maybe
fuck
he
off
only had a
big
couple
time.
scenes, but sorry, it was great.
So good. And it was such a good, I don't know, it was so like kind of integral to the story and everything.
Yeah.
It's very, very memorable.
Yeah.
Like he is like a very singular performer. Like he has that vulnerability and that, you know, he's so great.
Because you know what, when he delivers some of these more over the top things that he does in this show, it still feels authentic. It's almost like no matter what line they give him, it feels like it's coming from a real place. And so when he has like, I laughed out loud many times.
Yeah.
But like, there's bits like where he's talking about how he was, he kept getting lost in Vegas. And he's like, Vegas is a very confusing town. The streets aren't laid out on a grid system. And it's like, it's a silly non sequitur. But when he's screaming it feels real still.
Yeah, it was very entertaining. But yeah, I guess I'll just kind of explain to the listeners how they're sort of like this odd couple. Basically, picture the most, like if you're familiar with these actors, picture the most like obvious character for each of them to play, basically. I mean, Judd Hirsch, I would say, has more of a range of characters, but this is definitely the type of character he would be more generally put in. But basically, we've got Bob Newhart as George, and George is very much a straight-laced, mild-mannered guy who's very kind of like friendly, but not like outgoing or bombastic. Yes, he's definitely uptight. But he is like kind of lovable and quirky in his own way, and he has his whole stammering shtick that he does and that he's known for. And essentially, he is this, upper middle class retired finance guy who moves to Martha's Vineyard to open a bookstore and be closer to his son, who is opening a restaurant on the island. So, the thing that I really appreciated was that they made him like a very sweet and supportive dad. Like they made him like, he was like very invested in his son and his soon-to-be daughter-in-law's life. Like he comes in like right away with like a stroller for them as a gift because she's pregnant at the start of the series. And I just thought it was a very kind of cute dynamic that he like lived there and kind of relocated so that he could be closer to his son and his son's like growing family. And he seems to be well liked by people, but maybe there's like the standard, a bit of eye rolling because he's kind of like unsure of himself at times. And, he runs this like little bookstore as a, retirement sort of like hobby. And he takes it very seriously.
He's a very by the book person.
Book. Like the whole exchange.
Pun intended.
More like a sell the book.
Yeah.
And then we have Leo, who is kind of like, a trope that was very common in the 90s. I don't know if I said it at the top, but this was a 97-98 season run. And basically he's like a kind of a drifter, kind of a con man. He's always got something, he's always got
an angle.
He's always got an angle. And his personality is kind of Kramer-esque, kind of Cosmo Kramer-esque, but he's a little more crafty, like he's always got a plan. He's always got an angle.
Yeah, but he's not like a full-blown, like there's the version of this character that's like a con man or grifter.
Yeah.
He's not quite that. He's more like halfway between that and the Kramer who's always looking for the side hustle, looking for the weird gig, bouncing from job to job. Yeah. Oh, did you mention that he's a magician?
Oh, I did not.
Yeah,
that apparently his like passion, his like calling is to be a magician.
Yeah, officially he's a magician, and
but
Bob,
to make money, he does like the odd thing, like the odd shifty thing, like as a bagman for the mafia,
making deliveries, making monetary deliveries for the mob.
Basically, unfortunately, the relationship between his daughter Casey and him is like fully estranged because at the start of the series, because he had left her and her mother like a decade earlier, and to pursue all of his
Vegas-y bullshit,
Vegas bullshit, as we'll say, and like hadn't been in contact with her. So he's like very opposed to George in the sense that he hasn't been there for his child and is trying to sort of like salvage the relationship at the start. And like how he's doing that is he shows up in Martha's Vineyard again at the misguided invite of Ted, because Ted thinks, oh, I'm going to reunite them, because Ted is naive, obviously, and always had a great relationship with his father and can't really understand these complicated family dynamics that Casey has.
Ted does not get in enough trouble for this.
No, he does not. He gets off pretty scot-free on this, to be honest with you, and basically just springs this like deadbeat dad on his fiance, and she's like, what? Like, how could you invite him? And then there's this whole conversation between the two of them, which was kind of like dark but funny, where she's like revealing all these like things like, well, why don't you invite my former lit professor that used to chase me around with his pants down and stuff like that? And I was like, my God.
Yeah, and Jason Bateman's like, there's a lot we haven't talked about.
Like,
yeah.
And it's like, so, maybe you should have talked to him about this stuff before, getting married.
Yeah.
But, so there's like a perfect contrast sort of set up. And when they first meet in the bookstore, it's because like Leo has just kind of drifted into town to like go to this wedding. And he comes into George's bookstore and they don't know who each other is. So they have this like interaction where he's trying to like find a book for Casey and, like some sort of last minute wedding gift.
Before the reveal.
Yeah.
Of the
but
connection.
He doesn't say what the gift is for. But anyway, like we figure out later that it's like a last minute like gift. And he kind of haggles with George over the price of a like coffee table book, and then proceeds to like write him a check for it. And there's a very funny back and forth where, because, like Leo says, it's like a check from like one of the casinos.
It's a bank at a casino.
Yeah.
In Vegas.
So he immediately like gets on the phone to call and like verify the check, which I thought was funny on its own. But then he's like explains to him, oh no, it was like I went to a whole seminar on this. Like they gave me a stamp and everything.
Like this is how I have to verify the check. You see, I give them this number and they look it up. And Leo plays this whole angle where he basically accuses George
of being anti-Semitic.
Because he's like, this is because I'm a Jew and you don't trust me in my check, whatever. He's like, and Bob Newhart does a great way where he just keeps bouncing back to like the procedural thing of like, no, but you see, I tell them this number over the phone, and like he just is trying to just like dodge the whole thing.
It was a very cute moment. And then ultimately the check is like he kind of like cancels the verification because he feels bad. And then of course it is a bad check because Leo is
Leo
a deadbeat.
After Leo guilts him into not verifying the check, there's a line near the end of the episode where he says in passing about giving you a bad check. And the guy's like, wait, what did you say before the thing about my daughter? What was that other thing you said about the check? And he just like changes the subject and like,
well, my favorite bit is when in all of that, he just goes, why did you bother to haggle?
Why did you haggle
with the book if you knew we were giving me a bad check?
A check for $1,000. What difference did it make? Yeah, it's a very funny payoff to that.
It was very funny. So basically, when it's revealed like a couple scenes later where they show up at the restaurant where that Ted and Casey are about to open together, and it like that's when they kind of reveal like, oh, your dad's here, and of course Casey is quite upset. But then it's sort of that whole thing resolves itself like a little bit too easily, in my opinion. Like she could have fought it harder. Like they could have had the character fight it a little harder. But at one point as well, like I mentioned earlier, a mafia hitman shows up because Leo has run off with $25,000, and then he eventually reveals that he took the money to give to Casey and Ted, basically to start their lives off, and then he was planning to just like skip town again so that at least she had something from him, because he felt like he had not been there for her enough in her childhood. But really, is that a great thing to like leave your daughter? Because what if they tracked it down somehow and she's got this like dirty mob money?
Well, that's sitcom logic, but
very sitcom logic.
It
also,
leads to
the fact that the guy didn't like carry out the hit anyway, like.
It's really funny because I really enjoy the scene where he confronts George.
Yeah.
This is the mafia assassin.
Yeah.
He confronts George, and he's just like, he's like, you're this Leo guy that owes me this much money. And George is like, I'm not Leo. I keep telling you I'm not Leo. And the guy's like, okay, suppose you're not Leo, and suppose I'm not a mafia assassin. And like he says the words mafia assassin.
Yeah.
And I was just like, that's so funny. But then like Bob Newhart just has like a good.
Yeah.
Honestly, like there are jokes in this that are like Simpsons jokes done in live action.
Yeah.
That perfectly land.
Yeah.
Like it's pretty funny.
All of this is just an excuse to kind of let, Bob Newhart and Judd Hirsch just sort of do their thing.
Yeah, bounce off each other.
If anything, like there's like too much going on. Like this is the type of pilot that like it just reminds me of like Jerry and George sitting down and writing their pilot on Seinfeld.
Yeah.
And like there's way too much plot that is essentially just going to be these two guys hanging around each other.
Yeah.
You just need an excuse to put them in a room and bounce off each other.
But when it's this funny, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right?
I did like the setup though. I liked how they made it so that Leo couldn't go back to Vegas and had to stick around, and like George just happens to have this extra room above his bookstore, and that's kind of like the tag of the episode. And they have like this beat where it's like, oh no, it's just like George is like just like doing in his mumbly way, just explaining, oh yeah, there's just this room
Used
up there.
Used to be a house, and there's this bedroom up there.
And then Leo's like immediately like
light bulb goes off. This is after Leo had said like, well, he can't go back home. He can't go back to Vegas, right? And so, because the mob will kill him if he ever goes back there.
Yeah.
So basically he's like, I guess I have nowhere to go and nothing to do. And then George makes reference to like bringing something down from upstairs, and it's like this bedroom. And right after George admits that there's a spare bedroom up there, he's like, damn it! Because he knows that like as soon as he mentions that it exists, now he's screwed.
Yeah, so we didn't watch the next episode, which is like, I guess, the wedding episode. And I read something somewhere where it said something about Casey like standing him up or something. So it could have been that in that next episode, maybe she's still so pissed about this whole thing that they don't go through the wedding right away. But she's in the rest of the series, so it does seem like they are still together.
Yeah, they ultimately stay together, and obviously, like Leo obviously ends up living there
in the mix,
and there's all of that. I don't know. I think it did work for me, and I guess we can go into talking about the other episode. But like overall, like my thoughts on this show are broader than any one plot. But let's talk about the other.
Yeah, so
the other
I
episode.
chose episode 8 for a specific reason, and I already kind of explained it to Aaron, but Barry, I'm wondering if you kind of picked up on what was going on in that episode and the reason.
I picked up pretty quick. Like within a few scenes, I was like, I see what you're doing.
and I did not. Brynn had to explain it to me.
I had to explain it because, of course, Barry, you'd be the more likely person to like figure it out because we're both such TV nerds. But
it's a great episode to talk about it, so I'm glad you did choose it.
Yeah. So essentially, it's just a normal episode within the series. Like nothing major happens, but it's basically ram-packed with guest stars of some of the more famous and successful previous shows that both Bob Newhart and Judd Hirsch were starring in. So it's like this all-star cast of sitcom actors. And again, it's like, if you're a big fan of both of those people, you would probably have been like going crazy at the time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so basically I'll kind of summarize them. And I don't think this is a complete list of like everybody who is in it. But from what I could put together, so I'll quickly explain the plot too. So there's this charity auction that happens, and it's like to support, I can't remember even what the charity was. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
There's a big auction that happens, and both George and Leo win prizes. And George's prize is to go to a group therapy session, which is kind of funny. Like, it's like so random. And Leo's prize is a van. And Leo is thrilled by this because basically he hatches this plan that he's gonna become what he calls a taxi with added value. So he's gonna become one of these like local taxi drivers that not only get people around, but gives them like a tour of Martha's Vineyard. And the joke is that he's still new to Martha's Vineyard and knows nothing about the island.
Nothing.
And, you know, he's like, but they don't either. It's like, good point. So he's basically just going to BS people like on this tour and just like make shit up. And
it's a very Kramer thing to do.
It's a very Kramer thing to do. So basically in those two scenarios, we have like lots of room for extras and like different people that they're going to be interacting with. And everyone that they're interacting with, again, are these like various guest stars. So for the taxi passengers, we have Jane Carr, who co-starred with Judd Hirsch on Dear John. We also have Jeff Conway, who famously was co-starred with him on Taxi, as well as Mary Lou Henner. And then we also have Harry Groner, who was in Dear John. So, like, right away, he's kind of reunited with some of his former co-stars. And then when it comes to George's, like, plot, he encounters various people, both in the group therapy and just kind of, like, en route to do that. And some of these people include a former co-star, Peter Boners, who plays Dr. Robbins in this show, but was formerly Dr. Robinson in the Bob Newhart show. He encounters a man who thinks he's a pilot, but isn't really a pilot and is trying to buy a book about becoming a pilot. So it's kind of like a dark joke.
I have to just jump in and say that was, before I forget, at the start of the episode, like the episode opens
with this
on a guy dressed like a pilot in the bookstore looking for a book on how to fly a plane. And when Bob doesn't have a book like that, he's like, well, that's not going to work out well for flight number whatever, you know? And so it's like a weird joke. And at that time, I was like, this is a very odd, like completely way too silly joke to open on that then pays off later when you find out that he's treating a patient who thinks he's a pilot.
Yeah. So, and then this actor, Bill Daly, was on the Bob Newhart show. So I don't know if that is also, like, there could have been like little shtick that they were all doing that was like related to these characters. Like, it seems very layered, but again, if you're not a super fan of any of these shows, you're not going to know. I
did not recognize any of them.
We also have Julia Duffy as this character who is basically breaking up with her. It's kind of a non sequitur as well. It's kind of weird, but she seems like a more significant character, but turns out it was just a one-off for this episode. But she's basically breaking up with the therapist that is the leader of the group therapy. And she was also in the show Newhart. Then we have a traffic cop who is played by Tom Poston from Newhart. And then we have Jack, which I couldn't figure out what character that was. He was probably another group therapy participant, but he played Jack Riley on the Bob Newhart show. Or sorry, he was played by Jack Riley, who co-starred on the Bob Newhart show. So it's like packed with people. There's probably even more, and probably a lot of the lines were meant to be like cute, sort of like throwbacks to some of these shows, because I did pick up on one joke, like when he was when they showed Leo driving the taxi, he was kind of getting lost, and the Jeff Conway's character's like, haven't you ever ridden a taxi before? And then you're supposed to laugh.
It's even worse because they repeatedly don't say the word taxi.
Yeah.
They keep saying cab.
Haven't you ever driven a cab before?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, he was a co-star in the show Taxi.
Yeah.
I thought, here's my thing. Like, this is 8 episodes into the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously they brought in they called it the cameo show.
Yeah, that's what the episode is called.
I do kind of appreciate that they're at least breaking the fourth wall on that and not hiding the fact that there's all these cameos. But like, that gimmick, which is obviously like to try to bring in ratings, because that's the reason you do this. I feel like this show didn't need the gimmick. It's
a good show. They just needed time to build an audience.
Yeah, I just think it needed time. And like, also to me, like those plots that were in that episode, like Leo coming into possession of a vehicle and deciding to be a like taxi / tour guide who doesn't actually know the island.
Yeah.
And George being like kind of circuitously forced into going into a group therapy thing, which he actually probably does need, but like then he ends up sort of giving therapy to the people there, and it's like funny bits. Those are funny without the cameos. Like to me, like I did not recognize any of these people. None of those references landed for me. I still found it worked fine. Like I didn't need the gimmick. That's my view.
Here's why I think this is a very interesting episode to talk about. Brynn asked me if I understood what was going on. I absolutely did. I've seen Bob Newhart's show. I've seen Newhart. I've seen Taxi. That doesn't mean any of these worked for me. Like, not the jokes, the jokes are funny and all that. But this I find very funny because none of these people, and I'm sorry to our loyal listeners out there, none of these people are the TV royalty that this show thinks they are.
Exactly. Yeah. That's like, the issue.
None
right?
of them are household names.
No.
None of them, like, the most recognizable person who shows up. There's Harry Grainer shows up. He's recognizable for things he did after this. Or William Sanderson, who is a complete, Hollywood like legend. Sure, him.
Yeah.
But everybody else, none of these cameos are working.
Yeah.
And CBS specifically had this show, and it was actually doing okay in the ratings. It really was. It wouldn't necessarily be an instant cancellation, but supposedly CBS was like, we're not sure if we want to cater to this crowd, which is funny because CBS would later just be like, no, we're the television network for old people. But at the time they were like not sure.
They
about
weren't.
That,
they weren't fully invested in it. The thought that Aaron and I both had, we were watching it together, is that it just seems like this show was made too late. Like this show was made in the late 90s when this kind of thing, I don't know, it would just like the humor is great, but like it wouldn't land with a younger audience at all. It would only land with an older audience. And it's like maybe this older audience would be over all those old shows by now, because it's like some of these people that are popping in from Taxi, the show Taxi was on in the late 70s, early 80s. Like that's a huge jump in time. Like that's a huge, like it's not like it's like, okay, all the people from Cheers showing up on Frasier. Like that was more relevant. Like that was more of a exciting thing for viewers, whereas
That's
this
unique.
was like a little more like, oh wow,
This show, in theory, strikes me as a show that would appeal to the people who watched Frasier.
yeah,
But there's a thing where like the son, or the son-in-law, like Jason Bateman's character. What's his name?
Ted,
and like the son and the daughter, Ted
Casey.
and Casey.
yeah,
They're like classic late 90s Gen X characters. And those characters were the vanguard of the successful shows of 1997.
Yeah.
But this show pays very little attention and time
Yeah.
on them. This show is about George and Leo. It's right in the title. But I still think like this is 8 episodes in. I think if they had just like committed to doing this show and just keep it going, no gimmicks,
they could
no
have
nothing,
grown an audience,
it could
I guess.
have had a perfectly reasonably successful like middle level audience. Yeah, it did.
It did.
There was no.
It did.
I
Yeah.
don't know what. Like, there's nothing I saw in either of these episodes that tells me this show should have been canceled. There's no reason why this show couldn't have kept going longer, and it also felt like there was no reason for a Hail Mary gimmick episode.
Yeah.
Like,
I do think you're reading it wrong. I don't think this was a Hail Mary gimmick episode. I think this was an episode that they thought was funny. I think they thought the joke of them having cameos from all their old show.
Yeah.
I think there is no way the network wanted this.
I mean,
This is not something the network thought would have been
maybe they
good.
thought it was funny, but I guess that would be my one thing I would say about this show is like, I get that the types of characters that both of them are doing, that Bob Newhart and Judd Hirsch are doing, are characters that are reminiscent of other characters they've done successfully in the past. I get that.
Yeah.
But this show did not need to hang its hat on that. This show could have existed as a completely fresh, independent show aimed at people. Like, this show could have appealed to people who never saw them in anything else before. Like, if this was the first time that you ever saw Bob Newhart,
For sure.
you could find him funny.
I mean, we found it entertaining.
We did. It
without...
didn't need the nostalgia angle. It could have just been like, here's a new show with 2 talented people in it.
This nostalgia angle seems to follow Bob Newhart around.
Yeah.
There seems to be like the people who work with Bob Newhart or maybe this comes right from Bob Newhart. I can't. I don't know. Everything he's a part of seems to be about how great Bob Newhart used to be. Even though this show would be a great example of this is how good he still is.
Yeah.
But everything, like think about like, the most famous thing Bob Newhart's ever been a part of is his lasting impression is the end of Newhart, which is, the famous series finale, which pays homage to the Bob Newhart show. Like everything is all like about
which
looking
one
back.
has the good ending? Is it Newhart or the Bob Newhart show?
Newhart is the one that he wakes up and it's just a dream of the Bob Newhart show.
Oh my god!
Right?
Yeah, his whole, I get what you're saying. His whole career is always
like,
looking backward.
Yeah, so they're doing that, and like when we watched Bob, it was the same thing.
Yeah.
What I've seen of him on Big Bang Theory is constantly just being like, "This guy used to be great, everybody," and it just seems like all the writers who work with him just seem to want to be like, "We understand that you're great." And this episode doesn't need to exist.
Yeah.
It's cute, but I was glad you chose this because I was like, I enjoyed the pilot so much that I was like, I didn't need this.
Yeah. I kind of want to watch more of it, to be honest.
I was going to say, I was going to say the same thing. I want to watch all 22 episodes.
Yeah.
And frankly, one of the reasons why is because I don't want this episode 8 to be the lasting impression that I have.
Because it does have some good stuff there. And I was just, while you guys were chatting, I was quickly Googling because my research was like a little lazy on this prep. And I didn't quite decipher like why the show was canceled. So I don't know. It's like
Yeah, I don't see a reason to
I feel
cancel
like I
it.
want to like revisit this at some point because it was quite good.
Yeah.
Is it just that literally it was just something, even though the ratings were decent, it was just like not landing with the execs. Like the execs didn't get it. They didn't appreciate what was going on or what.
Is
like,
it just a thing where it's like at that time when there were fewer networks, they were like, well, we want a 15 in the ratings and we're getting a 14.5. So fuck off.
Like, yeah.
Like, is that why? Because this show in the era that we're in now, where you don't need to be like the number one show, like you just have to have a audience. This is a perfectly good show.
Well,
this is the first time we've reviewed a show in a while where I'm watching it and I'm like, I would just watch more of this for enjoyment and I see no reason to cancel it.
Yeah. The issue is, and this is an age-old issue, is like some of the people that are running these studios and like these executives, like they just don't have the same, they don't always have the same taste level and they don't have the appreciation for the like the nerdery of it all. Like they don't have the same TV history thing that they used to. Like I was actually listening to another podcast. Shout out to the Glamorous Trash podcast, one of my recent favorites. And basically the host Chelsea Devontes was she was interviewing Delta Burke because Delta Burke has been one of her like, you know, childhood heroes, and like she wrote a chapter about her in her recent memoir and like got this like, you know, great opportunity to interview her. So they are having this great conversation. And Delta Burke brought up the fact that it's just like every few years, every 20 years, like there's a complete turnaround of these executives. And a lot of these people running these studios, they don't pay attention to who anyone is. And they are not TV nerds. They just care about the numbers, right? They don't think about history, like, you know, so Delta Burke gave some sort of anecdote about how she was talking to Shelley Winters and the people that she was meeting with recently didn't know who she was. And she had to explain to them what her credits were and why she's important. And it's like, you'd think if you work in television, you're going to have that kind of like background or like appreciation. And this is what gets lost, right? So maybe the people at CBS at the time were, even though they were, you know, like they were kind of gun shy to sort of commit to that demographic of like, we're going to be the baby boomer network. They were gun shy of doing that, and obviously didn't like, they weren't really on board with all the like, and even though we were not completely on board with this episode, just like the idea that they don't fully appreciate what they had when they had like a legendary cast. And it's like, well, what can you, if you're so worried about it not being fresh enough, how do you make something like that fresh enough? You just keep good writers on staff, you know?
But also,
like they had Aaron Schur. He actually is the writer of that episode. And he went on to work on The Office and a lot of like shows that became insanely popular later on. So
yeah, I think they just needed to have faith in it and see it through. Cause like to me, it's like when we were, you know, discussing the show Bob, it was a show that felt like, okay, they're trying to like do something with Bob Newhart, but it wasn't like fully thought through. And it was very reliant on trying to pick up the audience of people who were just like nostalgic for liking Bob Newhart. Like it couldn't, it didn't feel like something that could necessarily stand on its own two legs. This show feels like it could. Like this show feels like if you're giving Bob Newhart in 1997 a new sitcom to star in, this is the one. He's perfectly suited for this. And like the Judd Hirsch character, you know, what was the show that we were analyzing pretty recently where there was a particular episode with that trope in it? The like hustler, like the con man who's visiting.
It was in the Uncle Buck.
The Uncle, right.
Adaptation, because there
Uncle
was
Buck
like
adaptation. And right. And there's that guy who's like the con artist
to stay.
who comes to stay. So I was talking in that episode about how tired I was of that trope. And like, that's such a like weird 90s trope. And so there's a particular, I love the line though in the pilot where Bob Newhart finds out that he's like this magician in Vegas. And he's like, I didn't know that my son was getting involved with a what did he call that? With carny folk or something like that. And
Carnival people.
But like, I don't know. So like the Judd Hirsch character on the surface is this sort of overdone cliche. But my thing is, if you're doing that character, this is the way you do it.
Yeah.
Judd Hirsch is the way to do that character and make it great. And like why I liked the show is that both of them seemed totally plausible as who they were playing.
Yeah.
Like both of them
Exactly.
were just such like lived in characters as this odd couple that they both seemed 100. Like you can imagine, I put it this way. You could imagine if neither of them had made it as actors in Hollywood and in sitcoms, that Bob Newhart would be running a precious little New England bookstore. And you can imagine Judd Hirsch trying to make a go of it as like a shifty magician in Vegas. Like there's something about both of them where you're just like, I believe this.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
they
that
understand the
works.
characters they're playing. This works. And they're just so like comfortable in the skin of these characters that I'm happy to, like you said, like hang out with them, bouncing off each other. I don't care about the plot. The plot's secondary. And they just needed to have faith in the fact that they managed to get these people into a sitcom together.
Yeah.
And even
I
like
wanted more Jason Bateman.
more
too.
Jason Bateman.
At this juncture, they barely know what they have.
They barely
yeah,
know what
yeah,
they have.
yeah. Totally.
That's a perfect sign if they don't know what they have. And like
Yeah.
Jason Bateman, I actually bought as a plausible like son of Bob Newhart. And the thing I appreciated most in episode 8 was that there was actually a bit where, wait, no. Wait,
It was
which?
like Bateman was
yes.
barely in that.
Yes. Episode 8, because there was the whole thing with the charity silent
Mhm.
auction thing. And they had signed George's name to some things that he didn't want to bid on. Like
Mhm.
both his son and Leo put his name down for some things behind his back. And he like won the therapy thing because
Yeah.
his son put his name down
Yeah.
for it. And he's like, how did you forge, like, you're so good at forging my signature? And he's like, yeah, I got really good at forging your signature. And then he did, when I was a kid, like getting permission slips for school or whatever. And then he makes a comment where he's like, I can also impersonate you on the phone, and delivers a line where he's doing like a Bob Newhart impression. And it's pretty funny. It's pretty cute. Like, so I don't know. I feel like given more time, they could have even made the kid characters
Yeah.
kind of bigger players as essentially younger versions of like a twist on their parents.
Presumably maybe that was what we see in the back half of the show. I mean, they replaced the daughter at this time with another actress.
Right.
So maybe they were thinking of going in that direction.
Yeah.
I mean, to play devil's advocate of a network executive, at this juncture, this is a network show. And if you're only appealing to an older crowd at this point, again, before CBS figured out a way to do this, your advertisers are not interested, right? Because you're not getting the demographics that you want. And in those days, that's what was really making
the demographics
decisions
that the advertisers probably wanted would be the people who would be watching Friends.
Well, 18, the 18 to 25 was a good one. The 25 to 40, these are the demos you want. What ended up happening was, at some point, CBS kind of started courting different advertisers, which is how they've sort of managed to kind of stay afloat in this very interesting. They have been, kind of at the top of the ratings game for a very long time now, which is very funny because, I don't know, is NCIS still the top rated show?
One of them.
I think it is, right?
Yeah.
Or if you think
It's
about
wild.
how, they were the only network still doing 3-camera sitcoms.
Yeah.
Because they managed to sell them.
Yeah,
because
2.5 Men and
Big
The
Bang.
Big Bang Theory. Those
Everybody
were both,
Loves Raymond.
those were hugely popular shows. Like
King of Queens.
Yeah.
Of real, they managed. So basically, a few years after this, a decade after this. Well, not even, because Everybody Loves Raymond would have been within a couple of years of this, right? they embraced this old school. We don't want to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But maybe the show just came just slightly too early.
Either too early or, like Brynn said, too late for too late for the one audience strategy, too early for the other one.
Yeah.
1997 was just the wrong year for this show, but
do this in 2002 when CBS was sort of kind of looking into embracing that.
Yeah.
Then there you go, right?
Or do it in 1992 when this was the only thing being made.
Yeah.
And this show is, from what I saw, better than a lot of the shows that got 5 or more seasons.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. Now it like has me thinking, I'm like, well, what are these networks doing now? Like, are there sitcoms currently playing? Like, now it makes me want to do like a sidebar like episode or something.
Sure there are.
Like,
sure
what's the NBC Thursday night now? Like, is that still a thing?
I'm gonna check.
Yeah, like this is kind of wild because I'm like, okay,
who's doing Abbott right now? Is that ABC?
Oh, yeah. What? No, I think it's NBC. Or is it ABC?
I think it's ABC.
I mean, that is like a legit, like, awesome show.
You know what's funny? If you Google NBC Thursday night lineup, it auto-fills to various years from the 90s. Like, it just assumes that clearly you're looking in the past.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's because it's also, that was their thing, man. Like,
yeah.
NBC's mid-season 2024 lineup includes the return of the Chicago franchise, which is Chicago Med, Chicago Fire, and Chicago PD, and the trio of Law & Order SVU, and Law & Order Organized Crime.
So it's all just procedurals.
It's all.
Well, they have Night Court.
Oh yeah, Night Court. The reboot of Night Court.
Should probably have a fun time and actually sit down and watch.
Yeah, we should.
Probably,
yeah. And yeah, I don't know. It's so interesting.
ABC. I guess ABC is the one doing the. Well, I assume CBS still has. I don't know, something.
They got something.
Sure, Kevin James still has a show on.
Yeah, that guy always manages to have a gig somehow.
But ABC, they got your Abbott. ABC's got your. No, who the hell's who's the Connors? That would probably be NBC, or that would probably be ABC as well, right?
Yeah, let's see. The Connors.
That show just hit 100 episodes.
Wow.
ABC.
Really?
ABC.
Yep.
Well,
wow.
they had the original show, so.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That should have been my obvious thing.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert for the people out there. Like, I don't even hate the Connors. I don't mind it at all. I mean, where else do you get to watch John Goodman and Laurie Metcalf on a weekly basis?
Yeah.
Well, as far as George and Leo goes, it's been a while since I think all three of us have watched a show and been like, actually, this is pretty good.
It's an easy watch. It's an easy watch. It's the kind of thing that, like, I'm sure I've said this before, but sometimes, sitcoms just need to be painless. Like, sometimes I just need to sit down and a perfectly fine sitcom will just flow fine, and I'll get a couple of chuckles. And it's a fine way to pass the time.
Yeah, just a comfortable thing to have on. And honestly, and as compared to the show Bob that we reviewed, where it felt like, as much as I had a lot of fun with trying to do the imitation and all of that stuff, that gag.
Jeez. Somewhere you're still doing that.
Yeah.
That build to that episode.
Yeah. As much as that was kind of,
Jesus
I
Christ.
won't do it. I promised. I promised myself I wouldn't do it. As much as that was fun, like, that show came across as like, okay, they're pushing this style a little too far. It's not really like earning its purpose in this construct of that show. Like, that show, everything felt a little forced. This totally worked. Like,
it's fun. Yeah. Cause that's 92, right? Something like that.
Yeah. But this, even though this show was made later, Bob Newhart's style feels fresher in this show.
Yes.
It feels totally fresh and relevant because him reacting to Judd Hirsch's character you're like, yeah, I buy it. This
He
feels
feel-
right.
That's a good way to put it. He
Yeah.
feel because I remember watching Bob and just being like, this style of comedy doesn't work. But here we are, 6 years after that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, it absolutely does.
Totally works.
If you know
Yeah.
how to employ
Yeah,
it, or
need
if you
to-
throw Judd Hirsch at it.
Yeah. When you take the Bob Newhart tool out of the toolbox, you need to also be using it for the right purpose. So, yeah. Good show.
Yeah. Fun
Good show.
stuff.
So, Brynn, how might one connect
Oh my gosh.
this 1997 to 1998 primetime sitcom with the most, I'm assuming, successful primetime sitcom of that same season, Friends?
Okay, so actually this is funny because there were an overwhelming amount of connections to the point where I was like giving up. Like I was like, I can't, like there's it could be like a massive spider web like of connections. So I'll just like focus on a few because I was getting overwhelmed. I'm like, I could spend an entire day sifting through all of this and like connecting it like with it. And I'm talking like 3 degrees or less, like multiple scenarios because of all the guest stars and because of everything. Like there's just so many connections, but I'll just focus on some of the major ones. So we have right off the bat 3 1-degree connections from people behind the scenes. So we've got James Burrows and Pamela Fryman, directors extraordinaire. And then we have Betsy Borns, who is a writer on both series. So boom, the 3 1-degree connections. Okay, and then so through Bob Newhart, he was in the movie In and Out with Tom Selleck, and Tom Selleck had a recurring role in Friends, so that's 2-degree connection. I'm sure I already called that out in the Bob episode. So he was also in the movie Horrible Bosses, along with Jennifer Aniston and Jason Bateman. And then Jennifer Aniston was, of course, Rachel Green on Friends. Paul Wilson, who played Deputy Zajac on the series. We didn't see him in these episodes, I don't think, but he's a recurring character. He was in the movie Office Space with Jennifer Aniston. He played the character Bob, who gets into the accident and makes the jump to conclusions mat. So pretty iconic character. And of course, Jennifer Aniston was Rachel Green on Friends. Again, we have the Jason Bateman multiple connections to Jennifer Aniston because he was in like 3 different movies with her. So he was in, as I mentioned, Horrible Bosses with her, as well as the movie Office Christmas Party and the movie The Switch. So he's just like co-starring with Jennifer Aniston left and right. They must be really good friends at this point. Yeah. And then, so Jason Bateman also had another series that was a short-lived series from like right before this, 95 to 96, called Simon. His co-star was Andrea Bendewald. I think that's how I pronounce it. And she guest starred on Friends. So there's like tons of connections through him. And then we have Judd Hirsch. So he guest starred on Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip, which starred Matthew Perry. Matthew Perry played Chandler Bing on Friends. And as I said, there's probably a lot more. And if any of the listeners out there are hardcore TV fans, they're probably shouting other ones out at me because it was like a lot of different connections.
They're
and again,
furious.
If you like look at episode 8, like a lot of those people were in stuff with a friend, like an actor from Friends, or they were guest starred on Friends, or, you know, there's 2-degree connections from them. It's just crazy. So there's like a lot of connections. Yeah. So I won't, maybe one day I'll take the time and do that. And it can be a side episode where I literally just listen. I don't know if anyone would find that entertaining, but it might be fun for me.
You mentioned In and Out, and this whole time, like that movie is like 97 or something like that. It's 2024 as we record this.
Yeah.
My entire life, I thought Matthew Perry was the lead in In and Out.
No, it's Kevin Kline.
And it's Kevin Kline.
Yeah.
And I looked at the poster and I was like, it's clearly Matthew Perry. And then I'm like, Wait, why does Kevin Kline look like Matthew Perry on this poster?
Oh, that's weird. I should look at that poster.
It's always, maybe it came out around the same time as.
Well, he was
else.
in that movie Fools Rush In, so maybe that's what you're getting mixed up. So yeah, so Matthew Perry was in that movie Fools Rush In, where he co-starred with Salma Hayek.
Right. And that's like 97.
Yeah, it's around the same time period. So it might be.
Maybe they have the same poster.
Yeah, I don't know. But it has in it. So there you go. Yeah. And then for the spin-off, I mean, the thing, of course, is that Bob Newhart and Judd Hirsch were already like legendary performers before this. So this wasn't going to hurt their careers by any stretch. Like, they both have continued to work. We've already called out a lot of the things that they've been in, including, like, so for Bob Newhart, of course, he had a run on The Big Bang Theory and Young Sheldon. He had recurring roles on very popular shows, including Desperate Housewives, ER, The Librarians, like in movies as well, like popular movies, including In and Out, Legally Blonde 2, Elf, Horrible Bosses. The list goes on. And then Judd Hirsch, of course, he was in another short-lived sitcom, which I'm intrigued by, but it doesn't fall within our time period. It was like a 2003 sitcom called Regular Joe, which co-starred Daniel Stern and John Francis Daley. So I'm like curious about that.
Maybe 2003, that's like a still baby John Francis Daley.
Yeah, he would have been really young. It would have been right after Freaks and Geeks. Nice. Yeah, and then he's like guest starred on endless shows, basically. He co-starred like some of his more well-known recent and semi-recent roles include Alan Epps on Numbers. He did 114 episodes of that. He co-starred, he co-starred on Damages. So it's like, it's so funny when you hear about these people. I'm like, oh, what have they been up to? I haven't seen them in a long time. It's like, no, they were just in tons of stuff I've never seen because it's like procedurals or
I can't believe Judd Hirsch did over 100 episodes of Numbers.
What? Yeah.
That blows my mind.
What's Numbers?
It's a procedural with David Krumholtz that like, it was something like where he was a mathematician who solved crimes.
Oh, okay.
Something like that.
Is that also, what's his name? Matthew Gray Gubler? Or is that
no,
is that another procedural?
He's on Criminal Minds.
No, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, he also had recurring roles on Marin, The Big Bang Theory as well, where he played. So it's funny.
Oh, right. Isn't he the dad on Marin?
On Marin? I don't know who he is on Marin. I've never actually seen Marin, surprisingly. But he is a dad on Big Bang Theory. He plays like the Leonard character's dad or relative. He was also in Uncut Gems. He was also in The Fablemans, which we've already called out, which is like his, in my opinion, best performance ever. And he also like recently had a recurring role on The Goldbergs. And he played like, I think the like grandfather on that. Okay. And then we also have, of course, Jason Bateman. Like everyone knows what the hell he's been up to. So soon after this series, like I already mentioned he was in Simon before. And like, obviously he had like many years in the 80s where he was like in TV shows. And then there was kind of a lull, but then he came back in a
Teen
big
Wolf
way.
2.
Yeah. So he was in
mostly movies, right?
So following this, following George and Leo, he was in the movie The Sweetest Thing, which didn't really end up going anywhere. But then he he got his most recent iconic role as Michael Bluth. And that's kind of where I rediscovered him. And I was like, this guy is like the best, you know? And then after that, he got so many movies. He's in everything. You know, he was in The Breakup, Juno, The Switch, Horrible Bosses movies, all of them. Game Night, which I found very dark and funny. And
I wanted to give a special shout out to people out there to watch Game
Night. It's a wild movie.
It is bizarrely hilarious.
Yeah. And then he, you know, most recently had a huge success in Ozark, where he plays very much a Jason Bateman role, but it's not a comedy.
Yeah.
So it's funny because it's like very suited for him, but it's like not at all a comedy.
But I imagine there's probably some people where like they sort of discovered him in that.
Yeah, probably. And then he was in the movie Air, and I'm like, it's wild because I enjoyed the movie Air, but I like fell asleep at one point, so I'm like blanking on what his character was. Was he like one of the agents? I can't remember.
I can't remember either.
Anyway,
I didn't see it. I've heard very good things.
It's good. It's very good.
I saw it. I enjoyed it. I don't remember what his character is.
We started watching it too late, and I got real dozy. And then we have Robyn Lively. So she, following her stint on George and Leo, she did a ton of guest star roles. She co-starred, she's been in like many things. She's from a very successful Hollywood family. Like she's the older half sister of Blake Lively. And
oh shit!
Yeah, her dad. She's also Teen Witch. She was in that campy 80s classic Teen Witch. She's the Teen Witch.
Is that a movie or TV show?
It's a movie. It's a wild movie. It's like one of those so bad it's good kind of movies.
Like the only Teen Witch I don't know.
Yeah, and so she's just been in tons of stuff, but most recently she had like a co-starring role in a YA series for Amazon that looks kind of like it was a cute show. It's called Gordimer Gibbon's Life on Normal Street. So it's kind of this like fantasy YA show that was like
the
very
title
popular.
Makes more sense now because I was like, who the fuck would greenlight
And
this
she
shit?
also had a recent recurring role on 911 Lone Star, which I guess is like a popular show. Then we have Daryl Thierse, who we didn't get to see much. Like he was in mainly in the pilot, but I want to kind of see how he is in the mix more in the other episodes because he's kind of he's like the typical like snarky employee at a bookstore.
I let it play a little bit longer.
Yeah.
So I got to see him in more, and I got to see Robyn Lively, who doesn't show up until episode 9 or something like that. He's very funny.
Wait, who played the daughter then? Who plays Casey in the pilot?
Bess something.
Okay, so sorry everyone out there. I kind of misspoke because Robyn Lively is the ultimate one that like took over the role. But
the episodes we watched were...
Well, she wasn't even in the episode 8. Like, there was no daughter in episode 8.
She was not in episode 8, but in the pilot, it was a different actor.
I will...
Barry can look that up.
Sorry, Barry also was Googling and completely forgot the name of the show we were covering already. Bess Meyer.
Okay.
Meyer.
So, yeah. So, we'll give her flowers as well because she was good in the pilot. So... But this happens and often happens with women. Like they get recast all the time.
I know, like why?
As if no one's gonna notice. It's annoying.
They were barely like learning how to use her character.
I know.
I thought she. I wanted to see more of her from where because she had a cute relationship with what's his
with
George.
Ted.
George. No, but with George.
Yeah, with George.
Specifically with George.
Because he was, her father figure at this point. Because he had been around for a long time and was very sweet to her. And, her own father was, like, not around. So...
She's in 2 episodes.
2 episodes. Yeah.
So get this. At least according to IMDb, she doesn't show back up again until episode 5.
Oh,
so
okay.
You're right. She's not... She bails on the wedding in 2 and apparently just doesn't show back up.
So, and now I kind of want to watch all of it.
I definitely need to watch this.
To see like how that plays out with her and whether it's like she bails on the wedding and then like isn't around and then comes back because she has to have the baby at some point. So
it's even weirder than that because when Robyn Lively shows up as the character.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was the same character because she plays it completely different. The look is different.
The look at everything is different, eh? Okay.
Yeah. So it's like clearly like one of those like we're not hiding it. We're embracing it.
So
that's weird.
I feel like
I have to go back because I was interrupted in the middle of Daryl.
You have to go back.
So Daryl Thierse, so he did a lot of things. He's actually more known as a successful like theater actor. But he's done a ton of TV as well since then. So he recurred on the series Popular, which I can't remember whether you were a fan of Popular, Barry. But it seems like a show you would have watched.
A little bit. Like
yeah.
not, early, what do you call it? What's his name? Ryan Murphy.
Yeah.
Before he became...
Yeah. He co-starred on the show Jessie with Christina Applegate. He guest starred in tons of like huge shows, including Judging Amy, Nip Tuck, Spin City, The War at Home, Numbers as well. But sadly, he passed away in 2009. So he was like working right up till his death, but he was like a big, important like theater actor as well. So I always find that so fascinating, the TV actors who were also big in the theater. I'm like, like I wish you could like see more of their theater credits and like what, but it's all like a mystery unless you're really dialed into like New York theater culture and history.
So one thing that we've never done.
What?
Because usually we watch 2 episodes of a show and we critique it.
Yeah.
And occasionally we like the shows enough to suggest that we might want to actually watch more of it. And this is the first time in a long time where all 3 of us are like, I would watch more of this.
Yeah.
So I propose.
in a long time, but it's happened a lot. Like we watched like Ned and Stacy, we all enjoyed.
I know it's happened, but I'm saying
John Larroquette show.
One thing that we've never done is revisit a show again after all of us have watched more of it. And I'm not looking for any specific schedule or time commitment, but I'm just proposing that maybe one day we do a George and Leo part 2.
Yeah, maybe we do that.
George and Leo, revisited. And where we've like binged on this whole season of George and Leo and actually have more thoughts on it. Just thinking like that's something we've never done before. So
now you're putting it out there. So
putting it out there, it's an option.
We'll see what.
The other option that we have is to see what Mr. Producer thinks about George and Leo.
Well, I mean, you always, for whatever reason, Aaron, always have to find out what he thinks. So, I
feel like he's probably a fan of these actors, I would think. Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Okay.
I just assumed he was somehow like financing this podcast.
He's our secret angel investor.
Hey, kids, what's shishkin your kebabs?
Hey, Mr. P. We're just finishing up talking about George and Leo.
Oh, sure. Newhart, Hirsch, little baby Justin Bateman. Now that was a program.
It certainly was.
I was lucky enough to work with Newhart in my day, but Hirsch, that young buck, he's the one that got away. I must have pitched him 24 times in my days.
Well, I mean, he was a pretty busy guy. You worked with Bob Newhart?
You bet. That guy could sell knives like you wouldn't believe.
Sell knives? Like an infomercial for knives?
Oh, kid, no. We're talking about the Klemensky slicer. Now, a product that fine doesn't need anything as crass as an infomercial, and they weren't really around in those days. No. You need the personal touch. Dare I say it, the door-to-door touch.
You sold knives door-to-door together?
I mean, I don't know about together. I was his supervisor. I tell you, though, you put that kid in the right room with the right folks and the Klemensky slicer, why, it was practically a match made in heaven. I barely had to say a word.
When was this?
Oh, shoot, must have been, Pearl Harbor was December. Must have been early 41.
Wait, how old was Bob Newhart?
Oh, geez. That couldn't have been more than 11.
So
you had an 11-year-old selling knives?
So before you got into show business, you're telling me you sold knives door to door with comedy legend Bob Newhart in the early years of World War II?
I mean, I don't know if it was before. I was well immersed in show business at that time. But, we all had a little downtime, during the Great War times, too. I mean, hell, I had already produced 4 Cagney movies.
Jimmy Cagney?
No, Leslie Cagney. Guy did instructional lawnmower film strips for John Deere.
and you produced them.
Couple of them, sure. I mean, guy like Leslie Cagney, you answer the call when he puts you, but he's got a lot of guys out there.
When you weren't selling knives with a child-aged Bob Newhart.
Klemensky slices.
Never got to work with Judd Hirsch, though.
No. Not yet, but hey, fingers crossed, right?
Fingers crossed. That's funny.
Now I'm just picturing a tiny, baby Bob Newhart selling knives door to door.
The thing is, I sort of can.
But was he stammering even back then?
Yeah, you can picture him walking into someone's home, setting it up on their table, just demoing some products and just sort of, stammering his way through it.
I think he actually had a stammer. I think he developed his comedy around it. I feel like I remember reading that, which I always found interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's great. I thoroughly enjoyed this show. Had many laughs. And did either of you have any leftovers?
No.
Yeah, that makes sense. This is the least notes I've written down in a long time, because I was pretty much like, not much to critique here. just some well delivered zingers.
Yeah.
All right. Well, until next time, folks.
Yes.
I feel like is there like a funny button that we could
I don't know.
end this on?
No,
we've had a good run of funny buttons.
Let's just end it right here.
Hey there, Mr. and Mrs. Joe American. You've used Klemensky slices. Now really stick it to Jerry with our Klemensky bayonets.
That Was a Show is created and hosted by Brynn Burney, Andrew Barry Helmer, and myself, Aaron Yeager. It's a production of Radio Gizmo in Toronto, Canada. Subscribe, rate, review, and share. Follow us on Instagram and tell your friends about it. That Was a Show?
Radio Gizmo.